I get that.
So there's this weird little period here, and
Yeah.
I have such a hard time figuring out why I can't remember what happened. But like if you hadn't have brought it up, I would have just passed that completely by.
Yeah, I know. It does feel like this is kind of an intense psychological question for you.
Very intense.
But since we're getting into a lot of this stuff, I don't know a whole lot about psychology and psychoanalytic theory or whatever. But you went through a lot of, and it's funny because the way that you've always told these stories to me as a kid, I didn't even realize when I was a kid, because I've heard these stories since I was pretty young, I knew that you spent time in prison, I know that you spent time in prison since I was a little kid,
Right.
That's always been something I've known about the world, is that, my dad spent time... I think I remember being like a little kid and you telling me about getting beat up by the warden. Like, that's one of the first things I, knew about your past, was that at one point in time my dad... Which is why, even now... No, seriously!
That's weird. What a lousy dad.
I don't know exactly... I don't remember when you told me. That couldn't have been when we were in Paradox. It was probably a little later, but... that's partly why I... Now, trying to become a public defender, that's what I use. I hope you know that I use that in my job interviews.
Oh.
Whenever I say, my dad was incarcerated, and that really affected. But it did really affect me, knowing from an early age that that's what happens.
Well, it's funny too. The thing I got busted for now is legal.
Yeah. Well, in some places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to me, I was right.
Yeah.
Nobody is going to quit smoking pot.
But anyway, part of what I wanted to ask, because you are talking about how you're like, I don't really remember the timeline and stuff like that. As you went through all this really traumatic shit, and traumatic events kind of fracture people's memories in a weird way,
Right.
And do you feel like that is something that happened to you, or?
Yeah, I think I just blacked a lot of stuff out.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole lot of stuff I don't remember at all.
Yeah.
there really is, even though I kind of remember these highlight things. And that's one thing that's fun for me about telling the story.
Yeah.
Because then I'll like just now, I was just going to pass by that little, I spent almost a whole another year in Puerto Rico there, and I guess that would have happened like after I got out of jail. Because I had a driver's license and everything by then. And so I was just laying around, and then they sent me back off to Puerto Rico, and I went back to school as a sophomore.
Okay.
At a school.
So you just keep doing your sophomore year.
Yeah, I must have tried it 3 or 4 times. And then, so I go to this Methodist school there, and there again it's very bizarre, even though at the Methodist school it was mostly American kids that were there.
Yeah.
And international students, really, because it was kind of an international place there in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And like my first day there, I meet a girl, this beautiful girl named Teresita Gonzalez. And she offered me a cigarette in the backyard after school was over. We became friends. And I lived a really wild life that whole time. I didn't really like school. I still felt like a real rebel, and what am I doing here? If I liked a teacher and I liked a class, then it was good, and I would really be, I'd be there sitting up at the front of the class if I liked it, But I was just completely against doing things I didn't want to do. Like if they wanted me to do an algebra class, I must have taken algebra 5 or 6 times. Never did pass algebra until finally this one teacher at Finster had me do a book report on that book called Flatland, which is basically more about geometry than it is about algebra. Little thin little book.
Yeah.
On a world where everything's in 2 dimensions.
Yeah.
So that's how I passed algebra. But so I was in Puerto Rico, and things were actually really good for me in a way, because Teresita lived down in the old town, old San Juan, and like there were like these cats, you know, that get together and jam, you know, at night and stuff in the old town. And like if I was there now, I mean, couldn't get me to leave, you know. And living down there, my dad let me use his car whenever I wanted.
Probably a nice car too.
Yeah, and
do you remember what kind of car it was?
well, he had a Mustang.
Oh shit! Yeah.
At first, and then later on, he got a Toyota.
Did your dad ever have? I mean, I know that later on he married. What was her name? Anne.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when he was in Puerto Rico, did he have serious girlfriends ever, or was he just
Yeah, he had a real serious
kind of
girlfriend
dating around?
named Millie.
Okay.
And Millie was really cool. She was
Yeah.
like this New York Jewish, I think, gal. We called her Mother Mildred.
Okay. Yeah.
And she was hip, you know. She was hip from New York, way younger than my dad.
Yeah.
And she was like my sister's age, you know.
Yeah.
And she was tall, beautiful, dark-haired, beautiful woman. She looked like a model. You know? And my dad's friends all had similar, you know, model-looking girlfriends. And his friends had yachts and stuff. And that's when I kind of started drinking. My dad would let me drink with him and his buddies and stuff. We'd drink rum.
Yeah.
And we'd play golf sometimes. And, you know, so I'm like living this.
Yeah. Tell me your thoughts on golf.
Oh, I love it. It's really a fun game. Even though it's a total waste and some, you know, the golf course and everything. But it's there's only like two things I can't do when I'm stoned.
Yeah.
And golf is one of them.
Yeah.
Because I start laughing. I find the
Yeah.
whole thing so hilarious. I start laughing at myself, and I can't hit the ball straight because I lose my concentration. But I would have fun with it, and I was good at it. I was really good at driving the ball, and even the chip shots I was real good at. But I never could putt very well, and so I would never do very well in the thing. And then I had a real interesting experience. You asked me about the golf thing. And this is, you know, to understand some of like my political sensibilities and stuff. And one time at the 19th hole, they called it, where you go to drink beer after it's all over with. We're in there, and my dad's sitting around with his buddies. And they start talking about, like there'd been some little boys local boys, who'd been out diving into the ponds, fishing out golf balls, and bringing them up and washing them off and reselling them to the golfers. And to them, that was like serious stuff, you know. They were really huge amount of poverty over there in Puerto Rico. So these little kids are doing this, you know. And I remember like these guys were like, yeah, that's real good, you know, that they're industrious, you know, little poor kids and stuff. And I don't remember exactly, you know, memory is such a hard thing, but at some point they were like talking about how, you know, they were like the masters of the world, sort of. Yeah. These guys, they were the upper class masters of the world. And it wasn't so much about them being white as them being rich. Yeah. And that was really all you needed to be in the club, was rich. And I'm sure they had their other places, but I know amongst my dad, and probably his friends too, you know, that they had a open mind towards, you know, race and stuff, but not towards class. Yeah. And so to him and his buddies, they were better people. But I know my father, that for him being a better person, it wasn't anything hateful or spiteful about it. It was just kind of like the way it was. Yeah. The great white burden, you know, sort of. He was kind of like a libertarian, you know. Yeah. It's like, I have the burden of having to manage the world for all these, you know, uneducated people, you know.
When you say he was a libertarian, was he into like Ayn Rand? Did he read like The Fountainhead and get into that? Do you know, or what?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. But I know he was very much that, you know, Jeffersonian. Yeah. Like that's why he didn't give me anything, because he was like, no, you got to earn your own money. Yeah. He wasn't going to inherit anything to me. Yeah. And that whole thing. He really believed in that. Get up in the morning and go do something. If you don't, you don't fall.
Well, so then let's get back to, so you're in Puerto Rico, you're dating Teresita. Well, how do you start dating Teresita?
Well, she just smoked cigarettes with me. And looking back, she was really just one of the most wonderful people. And there again, I was such an idiot. I mean, I really had no idea what I was dealing with. It was like years later, I think back when we were living up on the South Creek, when I kind of realized, like, who Teresita really was. And it was funny because it was at that point I realized how I had treated all these girls throughout my whole life. And man, I'd get up, 3 in the morning, I'd go out there and feed the fire, and I would just think about and pray. I did a lot of praying out there for forgiveness for the way I had treated women all my life. And it was very healing and something I really needed. And it's the kind of thing I would so love to be able to go back. And I actually did. There was a girl here in Tucson. After I got here, started living here, I called her up. And she came up and I said, I just want to forgive you. I just want to apologize for how I treated you. That was right before I moved to Owen. And her name was Renee.
Her name was Renee too?
Beautiful Italian girl named Renee.
That's funny.
And she loved me, she just really loved me in pieces.
Yeah.
But I was, and this is kind of part of why I don't remember things, I think, because I was just so busy trying to stay ahead of it all.
Yeah.
I didn't want any of it to ever catch up with me.
Yeah.
I didn't want any of the sorrow. Like, I never felt that. I never felt sorrow, regret, any of that stuff. I just felt like that I was on a mission, and that my mission was to tell the truth in the world, and my mission was to move the world forward in the, that whole liberal, left-leaning way, and which is part of why nowadays I'm so sad about what happened to the left.
Well, it's interesting because it never seems like you were somebody who was left in that. It never seemed to me like you were out reading Marx and Lenin and Che, or which is like a lot of people in the '60s, right? That they were right. I mean, in the words of John Lennon, carry around pictures of Chairman Mao.
No, I wasn't interested in any of that.
Yeah, you weren't. So, like, I don't know. I've never really thought of you too much as like a leftist because you were more into the.
No, Jesus was like
the spiritual.
The only hero I ever had.
Yeah.
Really, and a couple guitar. Bob Dylan I thought was cool, but I didn't think he wasn't my hero or anything. No, I was very free.
Yeah.
From all that for some reason.
But anyway, so
I was over there in Puerto Rico for a year, and a lot happened in me while I was there. I went to this huge rock festival called the Mari Soul Rock Festival, and there again I'm at this rock festival, and I felt just totally alone. Teresa had gone; she went with me, but she disappeared. First day we got there, we kind of lost each other. And I took some really good acid there at the Marisol Rock Festival. And I had 30,000 people all standing there talking to me at once. It was really wild. I'm like there, and I'm like all these people, I could hear them all talking to me. And I had one of those glow stick things. This is when they first come out. And you were supposed to bend them and they would open. So I bent it. And I broke it open, broke it, and all this stuff came flying out all over me, and it was so shocking that it took me out of the 30,000 people all sitting there talking to me, and then I had this amazing acid trip there at Mari, so all by myself, never spoke to anybody the whole time I was there. I just walked around by myself. I've done that at rainbow festivals. I went to a rainbow festival. Never spoke to anybody. It's weird. I've had this very isolated, lone eagle kind of a life, But what else happened in Puerto Rico? I don't really know. There again, I just kind of wanted to get back to the States because I felt that the States were where it was at. And I really lived, I had pot, I was really some of the best Colombian pot you could possibly get. I had it in my room. I'd have a whole bunch of it just laying there on the counter. My dad never said a word to me about it. I had beer parties at the house. Like all the kids from school would come up and we'd have beer parties and stuff. Never said a word to me about it. And then one day I just left. And it was weird because like Teresita had moved in with me. And I can't remember how this happened, but I like left and never said goodbye to her. I remember that. And that was what hit me when I was sitting up there in Colorado. It's like, you never even said goodbye to her. You just left. And, you know, she like really liked me. She like moved in. I didn't ask her to move. She just moved in, you know. And, you know, like, what a callous person I was, you know. That I just had no feelings almost. And I wasn't in love with any of the girls that I was with. I didn't know anything about that, you know. I didn't really fall in love with any girls until, I guess you could say I was in love with Becky. But looking back on it now, I have a hard time really actually calling that love. It was more, I got really bummed out when she left me, basically. It was more, and then Shannon, which is a whole other thing, who I met at Fenster.
Well, I guess that brings us to Fenster.
Well, yeah, because I go to Puerto Rico for a year, and then I came back, and then I'm like laying around. I guess that's what happened while I was gone to Puerto Rico. That's probably when my mom sold the house, and I came back, and she's living down in town. She wants to know if I want to go to school at Fenster. I agreed to go to school at Fenster, and that was just this big party scene, basically.
Well, because wasn't it a school for, like...
Yeah, kids that were there who couldn't make it other places. They were getting, almost every kid that was there had been kicked out of some other school or something for some reason. And, or their parents just didn't want them around. It was a boarding school.
Yeah.
And kids were all pretty wealthy.
Yeah.
Some of them were extremely wealthy. And
do you think, did your dad pay for you to go there?
No, my mom.
Just from the money that you got from
the money from the house.
The house, yeah.
Yeah, and Duke even went there. He was like, 5 years behind me, but so he went to school there for a while too.
But actually, not to keep going off on tangents, but what is Duke up to all of this time?
I really don't know.
You don't know?
No, I'm saying it's really terrible when I think of myself this way.
Yeah.
I was so busy.
Yeah.
Just being in survival mode.
Yeah.
And moving forward in this kind of vision of myself and what I was doing.
Yeah.
Like, to me, the whole thing was like a cattle drive or something,
yeah.
It was like I just trying to get to Kansas, And I really didn't take time to feel sad or sorry about things. I don't think I could. When sorrow finally caught up with me, it caught me hard, when I finally did get sad about what was going on. And so yeah, at Fenster I met Shannon, and at first I had this other girlfriend, this typical, beautiful blonde Danish girlfriend, blue eyes, blonde hair, big boobs, kind of girl, and that was what I was looking for. I just wanted. I didn't think very much about like compatibility. Even it was just well, if I had a hot looking girl, that was enough for me. And then I met Shannon, and Shannon was the one that was like, "What are you doing, hanging out with this Annette girl? You guys got nothing in common. What are you doing? Hang out with me, And I couldn't resist Shannon because she was fun. Like Annette never wanted to do anything really. She was boring as hell. She just kind of sit around looking good all the time. But Shannon wanted to have fun, and she could talk. And we'd talk about rebellion and all that kind of, social justice. And Shannon, she has a wealth of information about me. Because she remembers the things that I said back then.
I really got to do an oral history interview with Shannon at some point. Not even partly just to get some more of your story, but also just because she's had a really interesting life.
Well, Shannon was a trip because So I'd go up there, and Shannon and Annette lived in the same room.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
3 or 4 girls to a room,
Yeah.
and they all had these little houses that they
Yeah.
lived in at the boarding school.
And you weren't a boarder though, right? You were.
I was a day student.
Yeah.
But I'd sneak up there and I'd climb through the window and hang out in Annette's bed with her and making out and stuff. And then Shannon would be over there with some other guy, you know.
Jesus. Okay. Yeah.
And my friend Tony Cass went out with Shannon for a while, which was hilarious.
Oh,
when
that's
I look back
crazy.
on it. What an odd couple.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, I've only known Tony as like a 50-year-old
well, he's just such a
Fox News watching.
oh, he's a total geezer, you know. And so she's up there hanging out with Tony, and but Shannon, she basically like, I'm gonna get my man, you know.
Yeah.
But Shannon's like 13 years old.
Yeah.
But she's very sophisticated, 13-year-old girl. She had just come from L.A. and for the sake of the story, she was Kenny Rogers' stepdaughter.
Yeah.
She actually lived with Kenny Rogers and her mom Margot when they sent her to Finster. So she had like, at home, she had like Rolls Royces and all this kind of stuff, you know. And, but she was also really brilliant. And even then, she was very, very smart, and it was obvious. And I remember that we had a teacher, everyone's favorite teacher, Mrs. Chambers. And I know Mrs. Chambers was really like, why are you hanging out with somebody like Shannon instead of this dumb blonde, you know? And
well, I'll actually, if anybody ever watches this in the future, Shannon goes on to become the dean of students at Columbia Law School and a really successful lawyer. And yeah.
Well, that was really cool because so Shannon at some point, I don't know why. I mean, she's doing pretty good, going to school. Nobody's bothering, but she decides to run away from school.
Yeah.
So she runs. She's
from
like,
Finster.
From Finster.
Yeah.
So she's like, okay, I'm going to run away. So she gets like fake ID and all that. It was so funny because her fake ID and her name was Ruby Tuesday.
Oh my God! Of course it was. Yeah.
and
yeah.
You know the whole thing, and we do this whole thing. And I had my friend Dave Wade, who we talked about earlier. He had a thing going on up there in Tempe, and I took her up to Tempe, and I like got her a place to live up in Tempe. So she's living in Tempe, and I'm going up there on weekends to see her, and then coming back and hanging out with Annette.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I had these 2 girlfriends at the same time, and you know, it was just crazy. And Annette was from San Rafael, and Shannon's real dad lived in San Mateo. So I remember one time I went up there and like saw both of them at the same time. But that was a very bizarre trip. But it was on like hitchhiking. And so anyway, I went to Finster, and then Shannon runs away. She goes up to Tempe. One night she gets busted, you know, by the Tempe police. They send her home. They put her in juvie in LA County. So she's now this little rich girl, like hanging out with all the thugs down at the county jail. And so they had her there for a while. Then of course they sent her home, because she didn't belong there, you know. And she stayed at home for about 2 weeks, and then hitchhiked by herself back to Tucson. And like I don't think I even knew she was coming. I just I went to Finster one night to sneak in the window, and there was Shannon. As I was going in, she was coming out, and then we just like hooked up that night, and then she moved in with me, and because by then I had an apartment of my own, even though I was going to school still at Finster, was supposed to be. Yeah. But I had an apartment with a couple guys who had graduated the year before.
Well, let's pause.
And that's when I got kicked out of Finster.
Well, that's a good place to pause. Okay. So then you get kicked out of. How do you get kicked out of Finster?
Well, so Shannon has come up.
Yeah.
There again, I could probably get things kind of out of sequence, but because this might have happened before Shannon came back after running away from LA. I kind of think that it did. But, so I'm trying to go to school. I'm a senior now. I passed my junior year. And I did really, I was like teacher pet almost.
Yeah.
In like history and English.
I can relate to that.
I had these two really great teachers, and I loved my classes. They were both the kind of teachers that where you go in and, like if I started talking about, Tim Leary or something in class, they'd just go down that rabbit hole with me. Real often it was just like that kind of a class environment where you could just start discussing things.
Yeah.
And then, it's not like we didn't learn. I learned a lot about American history, and I learned a lot about English, too, from Mrs. Chambers. But it was almost like a college type class or something, I think, is how I envisioned college to be anyway. So I'm there. I'm a senior now. I'm like 2 weeks into my senior year. And
you're living in your apartment, right?
I'm living in an apartment with some guys.
Yeah.
I got my own truck. I got an old truck. And so I had all this freedom that the other kids in the school didn't have. You know? Also, I lived in Tucson, so I had all the connections.
Yeah.
I knew where all the drugs were and everything, so I could supply everybody with drugs if I wanted to. So it was pretty wild, but I was a good kid, I wanted to go to school, and I'm a good kid. And it was somebody said once, but
what did it?
Well, it was Renee once. I can't understand why they kicked me out of school. She said, "Well, I know why." And so anyway, I'm walking up the sidewalk, going up to the cafeteria for lunch or something, and they had a new dean there, and he like stops me on the sidewalk. I think I was walking with someone. Might have been my old friend Susie Leonard, who we probably won't take time to talk about, but some interesting, fun stories about Susie. But that's who Mrs. Chambers was actually always trying to set me up with Susie, because we kind of sat next to each other in class, and we had very equal kind of mental capabilities, sort of. And Susan was a problem child as well. But the dean stops me, and on the sidewalk, and he just says, "Scott, you're gonna have to start acting like everybody else around here, or you're gonna have to leave." And I remember just like looking at him and going, "Well, I don't want to be like you." I think I might have even said that. I was like, "Well, I don't want to be like you." And I just turned around and walked away. And that was that. That was the end of my school. And to me, it's so sad that like nobody was there to advocate for me. Like I wish Susan was there, or somebody or Mrs. Chambers, or somebody who could have stopped me and said, "Wait a minute, you're getting ready to throw your whole academic future, and you're throwing your whole future away. You're going to walk away because of what this guy just said to you. Of course we don't expect you to be like everybody else around here." So he picked a really stupid thing to say to me. There's nothing in the world I'd rather not do was to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
And but that's the way he put it, and so I just turned around and walked away, and that was that. So Shannon now, he's either living with me or real soon to be. And so I know, because I know she was in that apartment, we weren't there very long. And so then Shannon and I had all these adventures living around Tucson in different houses and trying to get by. And we both didn't really have, I made money selling pot, basically.
Yeah.
And Shannon just hung out with me and sat around looking cute, like a nice hippie girl, And we lived at a little place called, what was it called? Not Trail Dust Town. I don't know, it was like an old western town, and it was on the banks of the Rito River over here, which is really just a dry wash, unless it rains. And they had some apartments there that you could rent real cheap because you shared bathrooms and kitchens. You got a room, and so Shannon and I had a room there, and that's where I met Mitchell Tyler.
So that's before we kind of stop and dinner. That's who I want to introduce is Mitchell Tyler, who also went by Woodhead, right?
Yeah, we called him Ty.
And then One-Armed Bob.
One-Armed Bob came a little bit later.
Okay.
But we met Mitch there at Trail Dust or whatever it was called, and he was on a bus, a hippie bus, with some people, and they had just come up from Bisbee. And he had a bunch of turquoise cabochons that he had gotten somehow. Like, honestly, I'm sure, he was a thief, but not to people that he was friends with, He would steal from grocery stores and stuff. But, so we met Mitch, and the first day I met Mitch, him and I went.
Well, how'd you meet him? What?
I just saw him there. I was walking. There was a Circle K. I was walking over to get cigarettes or something. He said hi. He said hi. And we started talking. And you want to go smoke a joint? He said, yeah.
Can you describe what he looked like to me?
I have a hard time describing what people look like. He wasn't big. He was short. He was probably only 5'6" or something at the most. He had long blonde hair. Can't think of anybody in particular he looked like, but he was just your basic kid. He grew up in Sacramento, California. He had dodged the draft and gotten busted for it, and he was in jail for it. And this is all before I knew him, back in California. And I think it was Ronald Reagan who, pardoned him or something.
Oh, when Ronald Reagan was governor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he always, I know he's an asshole, but he pardoned me. So
that's funny. I didn't know that about Ty, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Ty is kind of the figure in your past who I know the least. Well, partly because I never knew him. I've known Shannon, I've known Becky, but I never.
Well, Ty was extremely important to me.
I know, yeah.
And he was 3 or 4 years older than me.
Yeah.
But we just hit it off, and like I said, that day we met. This was really important because we went down and sat in this dry riverbed, watching the sunset, smoking a joint, and we started talking about this, that some people were here just to do things for themselves, and other people were here to do things for other people. Which kind of person are you? And we both agreed that we were people that were here to do things for other people. And that's what brought us together. Just that one day sitting there watching the sunset together, we agreed that we were, we wore the white hats, kind of. We were the good guys, and we were protectors and savior people. We weren't, and the Jesus thing, it was never we didn't go around and talk about Jesus, but it was always in the back, that was part of why we did what we did, is that we had this, Jesus Christian thing that kind of moved us forward. And that's so bizarre because, we were both being real jerks a lot of the time, but it was we didn't see it. We saw the good things that we were doing, and so we did. We helped people a lot, we'd help just we'd go make sure everybody got just real small, stupid things, but they felt important to us. We would help if we found somebody on the street, we'd help them out, and then then Mitch And Shannon and I, all three, we got a house together.
Mm-hmm.
And that was that house over on the Mesquite that Shannon was talking about last night. And we lived there for quite a while together. And Ty would, I'd go back and forth, but he'd go back to Florida and work sometimes. He had these weird little jobs that he'd do. He'd go back and work in Florida and buy pot, bring it back because he could get Colombian weed.
What was he doing in Florida?
I don't know why he ended up there, but he was there. He had friends there, and he'd go there and he'd work and he'd buy Colombian weed. And that was right when Colombian weed was first coming into the country.
Yeah.
Because before that was all just this rank ass Mexican stuff. So he goes out and he's bringing back Colombian weed, and it was like $30 an ounce, and people were like, "What? You want me to pay $30 an ounce?" You know, because they were all used to paying $10 an ounce, you know. But the weed was just way. I mean, it's like better than the weed that I get nowadays. You know, stuff was really, really good. And so he would go down there in Florida and get. And I went out to Florida with him a couple times and worked. But he moved up here, and but anyway, him and Shannon and I, we lived together. And we just did everything we could to be radical. I mean, we would do things like we would rack up like huge electric bills, water bills, any kind of public service, public utility things, and we'd rip them off.
Yeah.
Because you could do it back then. It was really easy. You just change your name on the thing or something, you know. And so we were always ripping off the authorities, and Ty got really into doing like food stamps and stuff, which I wouldn't do. I didn't want government money, you know. And so that was kind of a thing between us because he was falling into that trap, to me, like a trap of the social being taken care of by the state, which kind of, I think, really had a lot to do with his demise later on, because everything became so easy for him, and he started lying about his health. He started telling them that he was sick in ways that he really wasn't, and eventually he kind of became sick, you know, in those ways. Kind of talked himself into it, sort of. It was weird, you know, but so we lived there together and stuff, basically until Ty wasn't there when Shannon left. He must have been in Florida. But then Shannon left. When Shannon left, that was the end of all that.
So why did Shannon leave?
Well, Shannon left because she'd been hanging out with me.
Well. So first of all, because One-Armed Bob comes in. Tell me about One-Armed Bob.
One-Armed Bob wasn't really that interesting a part of our thing. He was just some guy.
Well, his name is One-Armed Bob, so it's just.
Yeah.
Why I wanted in the story.
Yeah, it came up over dinner last night. Bob didn't have much to say.
Last night was like the first time I'd ever heard the name One-Armed Bob, and so that's kind of just why I wanted.
Well, he was one of these guys that was born that way.
Okay, yeah, he didn't lose it in the Vietnam War. Or
no,
yeah.
And so he had this kind of like your cousin Kevin.
Yeah.
And so he had this kind of a problem, you know, from the disability of being this one-armed guy, and he had become a junkie.
Yeah.
A heavy, bad junkie. Yeah. And Mitch met him someplace, somewhere, brought him home, which was nothing unusual about that.
Yeah.
But he ended up Mitch liked hanging with him because I think the whole reason was because Bob made a real good cover. The two of them with Bob with his bad arm and everything. And so they'd go down to Mexico together and they would smuggle heroin back across the border. And there again, they weren't really trying to make money or anything. They just wanted to have heroin. Yeah. And that was something I'd get in big fights with those guys about it.
Did you ever do heroin?
Never did. Well,
it's like the one drug I've never heard you talk about doing.
I never did it.
Yeah.
And well, that's funny you bring that up because my nickname, Ty gave me the nickname, One Shot. That's where that comes from.
Okay.
Because Ty would always be like, just take one shot. Just take one shot. And I was like, no, I'm not going to take one shot.
Yeah.
and I got the nickname One Shot.
Oh, interesting. That's
Yeah.
funny. I didn't know
I
that's
know
where that
most
came
people
from.
would never know that's where it came
Yeah.
from, but that is it. Then it became like a really good nickname for me in
Yeah.
a lot of other ways.
Yeah.
Because I saw, and Ty was funny that way. He gave everybody nicknames.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Well, every single person in every story you've ever told has a crazy nickname.
And Ty's the one that gave it to him.
Yeah. Where did Woodhead come from?
Him, he made it up.
For himself, and he just said, "I'm Woodhead."
He made up the name Woodhead because I had gotten into this thing where I was going out and getting firewood, and I became kind of fanatic about it.
Yeah.
And because I was, I didn't want to starve to death.
Yeah.
And Ty, he had a bunch of stuff. His parents had given him a trailer, and he was getting money from the government and stuff. So he was living pretty good, but I didn't have anything.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, after I came back from Hawaii, or maybe it was right before I went.
This is like
to
10
Hawaii.
years down the line.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Yeah.
And so I was going out, and I had a pickup, but I'd go out and get wood, chop up, load up my truck, bring it back town, sell. $50 for a truckload of wood, and which was a lot of money in those days. And then, so I think he got, because that's the way he was. He was very sarcastic or sardonic even at times, and he started calling himself Woodhead as a way of making fun of me, kind of.
Yeah.
Because I was so obsessed with getting wood.
Yeah.
But Woodhead fit him really well, so it just kind of stuck.
Okay, so I think we can kind of start wrapping it up for the night, but let's talk a little bit about, so you're living with One Armed Bob, Ty, and Shannon, and Ty and Bob are total junkies, right?
Right. Oh, you want to know what happened to Shannon?
Well, I mean, talk a little bit about just kind of that dynamic between the four of you first, and you've got Shannon there, who's younger than all of you, and then Ty and Bob, who are.
But Shannon was on total equal ground.
Yeah.
Both, even though she was a female.
Yeah.
That didn't.
Yeah.
She wasn't looked down on at all because of that.
Yeah.
And her age.
Yeah.
She was intellectually and emotionally totally on par with the rest of us. Yeah. And there was never any discrimination.
Well, she's a lot smarter than you.
Well,
I'm just making fun of you. I'm sorry.
Used to be. But,
I'm just making fun of you. I don't mean to insult you.
No, she was very sophisticated. Like I said, she's Kenny Rogers' stepdaughter. She's been around. She knew, was a guy, the Eagles, famous guy from the
Glenn
Eagles.
Fry,
Don Henley. Don Henley.
Yeah.
Good friends with him, all these people.
Yeah.
Glenn Campbell, was like her next door neighbor.
Yeah, yeah.
She was a very sophisticated girl, and like her mother was really smart, was like in Mensa and all this. Although she was like from Brownsville, but somehow or another, she was a real hot blonde.
I don't know Brownsville.
Brownsville, Texas.
Okay.
And Corpus Christi, Brownsville.
Yeah.
And somehow or another she gets to meet Kenny.
Yeah.
And marries him, and then, but Shannon, she'd already had with this other man, so she wasn't.
Yeah.
But Shannon was raised almost more by Kenny and Margot than she was with her dad that was up in San Mateo. So, she knew all the, like, how to eat, fancy food and all that, all that kind of stuff. So, but she hung out with us, she slummed around with us that whole time, and she would do things like, she introduced me to a lot of great literature. She was always like giving me books to read, really great books. Some of my favorite books were books that Shannon gave me. She would take me to movies. They had a little movie theater here called The Loft that showed like Ken Russell films and stuff. And she would take me to those, and so she was trying to give me some, sophisticate me a little bit, which worked,
Yeah.
And, but she decided she wanted to go back to school, and goes to school, and there was a teacher there, a professor, by the name of Don Graham.
Where is she going to school?
She was going to Pima College.
Okay.
Because you could just get in. You didn't need the diploma or anything. Because she never graduated from school either.
Yeah.
She dropped out as I don't even think she was a freshman, I guess, when she dropped out. So I knew Don Graham because Don Graham was Corey Witkoff's big sister's boyfriend.
Okay, yeah.
And so I met Don Graham because I was over there one day, and he came over in his hippie van and drove me and Corey around in the van smoking pot. And so I knew he was like a cool guy.
Yeah.
So I told Shannon, I said, oh, look, Don Graham's teaching here. Why don't you take a class from him?
Well, what did he teach?
He taught English and religion. So she took a class from him. And she was like 17, 18 years old. He was in his 40s. Yeah. And he got her to marry him. So she marries Don Graham and has a baby named Jalila. And then she took off because Don Graham was real bigwig in the Sufi community. Yeah. And he was editor for Pir Vilayat, who wrote books on Sufism. Yeah. And so she got to see, she lived in Paris, lived in India, Africa, I think, for a while. Mm-hmm. Again, she became even more and more sophisticated. And Don Graham was real good friends with Tim Leary's ex-wife, Rosemary. Mm-hmm. And that whole, he went to Yale. Yeah. So he was in with all those people and stuff. So Shannon knows all those people. Yeah. And so that's what happened. And so she left. When Shannon left, that was the end of, it's a good place to stop. Yeah. Because that's when everything collapsed for me when Shannon left. Shannon left, Ty left, went back to Florida. I had 4 dogs. He took one of the dogs with him and lost her somewhere in Texas. My other 3 dogs all disappeared, just one at a time. Boom, boom, boom. And I love my dogs, and they all just kind of disappeared on me. Then I get kicked out of this slummy house we've been living in for rent-free pretty much for the last couple of years. And then I get busted over in Texas and for 350 hits of LSD.
And that's a story that I think we need to tell more fully.
Well, so that's when that was the end of, that was when that whole era of my youth, my life in Tucson, and all that's when that all finally ended. And I left Tucson and went to my next world.
Well, let's call it a night then.
Okay.
And continue on tomorrow.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's fun talking to you.
Yeah. I'm having fun telling these stories.
Don't share this with anybody.
You know I'm going to share it with everybody.
Anybody important.
You know I'm going to make money off of this.
I hope so.
That's the whole... just so everybody who's watching this knows, the whole purpose of this is so that I can exploit my dad and his good stories and his interesting personality in life so that I can make money.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So here's a little thing. One day when I was in Puerto Rico, I think I was just there for like a month or two. I'd gone over there. I think it might have been like after Shannon left me, as a matter of fact.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm in Puerto Rico, and my dad says to me, he says, you know, and I can tell he's kind of looking at me, you know, he knows me, you know. Yeah. I'm this kid. And he goes, you know, you kind of remind me of like Jack London and John Steinbeck and those guys. You know, and I'm like, oh yeah? And he's like, yeah, you know. He says, because I'd written him a letter or two. Yeah. And he's going, you know, you're a really good writer. Yeah. He says, you should be an author. That's what you should do with your life. And this is such a funny story now looking back on it, because I remember very well. I looked at my dad, and I said, Dad, I'm too busy trying to be a book to write one. Yeah. And I remember him looking at me with so much contempt. It was like, I knew you were worthless, but I didn't know you were that worthless. Well, it's like I just handed you the golden ticket for your life, and you turned it down so that you could go on being this degenerate that you are.
Well, and I think that's what you mean by when you say, because you tell me that all the time. You always say that I am the person that I take after the most is Grandpa Ray, and and I think that's kind of the thing. Is like I think that's almost where that you see that the most. Where I'm the exact same way as him. Where I heard all these stories all my life, and then my first thought is, well, this would make a really good book. Somebody should write this down and make some money off of it.
Well, I've tried to get people to make a book out of it, but nobody's taken me up on it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah. Thanks for talking to me, and we should eat some dinner, and then keep telling stories tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Love you, Dad.
Love you.